Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland. Here I am in Weybridge, United Kingdom, in the county of Surrey. Anyway, part of the Runnymede and Weybridge constituency. This is a small town almost 20 miles from central London. You may know all distances from London are measured from the base of that Charles I equestrian statue on Trafalgar Square. So this is a town of over 15,000 people. The census was a bit behind reality. So it's a rather middle-class town. It takes its name from the fact that there's a bridge that spans the River Wey, spelled W-E-Y, Wey, which is a tribute to the Thames. Now there is Weymouth, which is miles away in Dorset or something, and Weymouth is not, there's a different River Wey there. So there are two rivers called Wey in the United Kingdom. Apparently there's 7 called Avon. The most famous one is the one that bisects Stratford-upon-Avon, giving its name to the county of Avon, but that's much further west. So yeah, here we are in southern England, and it's a very prosperous area. Now, the centre of the town doesn't seem that prosperous, but there are these very expensive residential estates on the edge of the town, plenty of individual houses, so slightly older population, not that many ethnic minority people, though obviously that's increasing. So what's notable about here, there was a palace here, it was called Oatlands, that Henry VIII gifted to Anne of Cleves. Anne of Cleves, whom he famously married in 1540, because her father was a German Protestant magnate. So Henry VIII, being deeply displeased with her, the Flanders mayor, and where he'd seen a rather flattering portrait by Hans Holbein of her. So that was false advertising. And when she saw Henry VIII, she said, "Who is that fat man? I like him not." So Thomas Cromwell was the Lord Chancellor, and the King's chief minister. He persuaded the merry monarch that he had to go through the marriage. It would be diplomatically cataclysmic if he backed out. So he very reluctantly went through it, but said, had it annulled the grounds of non-consummation. So she lived in a very luxurious retirement just outside Weybridge. I think that the house no longer exists. What else is notable about Weybridge is there was Brooklands, which I think was the first motor racing track in the United Kingdom, constructed in 1907. It no longer exists. There's a heritage site. There was Brooklands College. It's a bit up the hill towards the railway station. Because remember, Carl Benz, that German, he invented the car as we know it in about 1883. And so, 1907, the cars were not even a generation old. And the technology was very primitive by modern standards, went very, very slow. And you were super rich if you could afford one. Of course, mostly if somebody owned a motor car, then he wouldn't drive it himself, and it was invariably he'd have his driver, because they were thinking of horse-drawn carriages. Of course, in those days, you said car, people assumed you meant a horse-drawn carriage. And motor cars were often called motor cars in the 1960s to avoid confusion with a horse-drawn car. Remember reading The Eve of Waterloo, was it by Lord Byron, talking about a car in 1815. Obviously he meant a horse-drawn carriage, and that's why sometimes you say horseless carriages. So here there is an Anglican church, St James's. I believe there's a Catholic church too, and then one of the dissenting denominations, one of the oldest buildings in the town. So there aren't very many historic buildings, though. It's first mentioned in the 7th century AD, and certainly there were people living around here in the Bronze Age. So what else about Weybridge? Yeah, so the local Member of Parliament is Dr. Ben Spencer, a psychiatrist who's age 43, who was first elected in 2019. He was a Conservative candidate somewhere in London in 2017 in a safe Labour seat, but he had to actually help a Conservative colleague elsewhere who was campaigning in a winnable seat rather than waste his time. So that's it. He's married with 2 children, quite well regarded. Now obviously the 2024 election was disastrous from a Conservative perspective, but this is so safe that the Conservatives only had their vote share go down a little. I can't remember who was the main opposition to the Conservatives. Was it Labour, and then they flipped, and now the Liberal Democrats are second and Labour are third, or is the other way around? But I do remember the 2 major opposition parties, they swapped position between second and third. I mean, not by choice. Okay, Reform UK fielded the candidate, even the UK Independence Party, which virtually disappeared. So you're getting a flavour for it. Somewhat characterful, a few bland buildings, not too many of the chain stores. It is refreshing to see a few individual family-owned boutiques. Now here is that rarity, a functioning branch of a bank, of Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. Used to be the Midland Bank. In about 2000, Midland Bank, the listening bank, as they used to market themselves, they're bought by this one. Okay, it's very difficult because so many bank branches are being shuttered, and yeah, so a few eateries. Look at these Nepalese cuisine, often run by ex-Gurkhas. There was that campaign led by Joanna Lumley, the actress, whose father was a Gurkhas officer, to say those who'd served a number of years ought to be permitted to settle here. And Nick Clegg, sometime Deputy Prime Minister, Liberal Democrat, he threw his weight behind that campaign. But ultimately it was a judicial decision. But is this wrong that we've got Critarchy now and they're allowed to live here forever? Okay, after they complete how many years meritorious service? Obviously the British Army desperately needs them. Look at this, an empty shop unit. So there's rather a lot of dying high streets. Weybridge is not that bad, which shows us quite a prosperous town, that it can support a lot of these small businesses. So yeah, pleasant place to live, very close to Walton-on-Thames. There are a few cycle paths, rather low crime, quite well rated state schools. And there's St George's Weybridge, which is, I think it's actually a Catholic school, but methinks that is merely vestigial, the religiosity of the school. One of my friends had his daughter and son attend that one. Okay, so and look at that ale house, the Giggling Squid. I've never been in there. Does it specialise in seafood? Obviously, there's a chain of them all across the United Kingdom. Okay, so quite a few pubs. And look at this big building, ER2, as in Elisabetta Regina, the late Queen Elizabeth, 1954. Is that some sort of telephone exchange or postal sorting office? It seems to be derelict. And there's a similar one in Walton-upon-Thames, not too far away. Okay, so you're getting some idea of it. Some council housing was built here in the 1920s. Not saying this exact street. So some rather fine early 20th century two-story houses. So built for people who had plenty of disposable income. Some of them starting to commute into London on the train. If they're doing very well in those days, own a car to be able to drive all the way in. So yeah, Ringo Starr used to live in the late 60s, the Beatles drummer. Cliff Richard lived here for many years. Mike Yarwood, who just died 2 years ago, he lived here. He was very well known from, say, the 60s to the 90s as an impressionist, taking off all sorts of well-known politicians. And he latterly lived in Brinworth House, that retirement home in Twickenham for retired actors. Yeah, so he died at the age of about 90. But he was kind of largely forgotten for the last 10 years of his life. Anyone else famous who lived here? Is it Frederick, the Duke of York and Albany, lived here. He was the second son of King George III? So yeah, that's it. So you've got some sort of idea what Weybridge is like. So perhaps not a real tourist magnate. What do you think? But not ghastly either. More of a pleasance than many places hard by, some of which are very forgettable. Okay, there we go. Right, thank you for coming on my whistle stop tour of Weybridge. Toodaloo.